What is shakin', Internet? Welcome to The Weekly Coin, a weekly podcast discussion forum for the game Hearthstone Heroes of Warcraft. I'm your host, Saltz, and this week's topic is, Are Legendaries Too Legendary? Welcome to The Weekly Coin, a weekly show discussing topics from Hearthstone, Blizzard's new CCG. Every week we pick a topic to discuss, but before we dive in, let's look at some viewer comments from last week's talk about going first versus going second. Thing1 wrote, "Priests are best going second, just because of mind control. Coin helps making sure you can cast the ridiculous amount of removal with Smite, Pain, and Death, or if you aren't having problems there, you can save the coin for a turn 7 Mind Control, or MC. There you go. Thing 2 writes, all classes are good at going first if they are aggressive. Charge warriors, anything with a leopardome, and warlocks come to mind with their fantastic 1-drops that are hard to answer. If you'd like to submit a comment or topic suggestion, you can either add one to the comments below or send an email to the.weekly.coin@gmail.com. So today's topic is, Are Legendaries Too Legendary? The basic idea is that Legendaries are almost all pretty strong cards with some unique mechanics, like Ysera's Dream cards or Malygos's multiple spell damage ticks. A lot of new players see these cards and start drooling, and when they play against decks with Legendaries, they often get stomped, or raffle stomped even. Of course, many pro players have the opposite view and say that Legendaries are situational at best, and find many to be pretty mediocre. So let's take this from as many different viewpoints as we can. First, the newbie playing Constructed. You're sitting on a pretty small card pool outside of the basic decks. If your opponent starts throwing multiple Legendaries out, you may or may not be able to handle it. Why? Because the basic decks are pretty standard, with some good cards and some totally crappy cards. There is little theme to the basic decks, and even if your opponent also has no theme or synergy in their cards, Legendaries are going to provide some great value. This is the main reason why people are complaining on the forums. But let's come back to this in just a bit. Okay, let's say we've moved on. We're climbing a ladder, building a card pool, and have some synergy in our deck now. At this point, if the opponent just has Legendaries with no real deck strategy, you're not going to get stomped every time. Yes, you'll still get overwhelmed by Hogger or blasted in the face from Ragnaros every once in a while, but not only have you seen many of the good Legendaries at this point, but you might even have a few of your own. Moving even further, once you reach a massive card pool and start facing well-oiled decks, you start realizing that some Legendaries just aren't worth playing, at least not in your decks. By this point, you can really build decks that work well together and have cards that play off of each other. Sometimes the Legendaries fit into this model, but oftentimes they don't. Now let's take the most extreme example of constructed Legendary decks. Total Biscuit is a famous YouTuber and Hearthstone player that has a deck with 23, last count I saw anyway, Legendaries in it. 23 Legendaries. Watching it in action, it gets crushed quite often. This is because the Legendaries don't work well with each other more times than not. If there's no synergy with the cards, then your play is pretty much going to suffer. I hope you're seeing the trend here and where I'm going. Basically, the more cards you have at your disposal, the less enticing Legendaries are. For example, Argent Commander is one of the most utilized cards in the most upper level decks, and it's only a rare that costs 100 dust to craft. There are a lot of good common and rare cards that will win more games than most Legendaries. Of course, that's also the problem. Without a huge card pool to build your deck from, where does that leave you? Turning to the solid Legendaries like Ragnaros and Sylvanas. If your deck doesn't have a lot of cards that play well together, these cards really don't care. Ragnaros doesn't need cards to play around him. He just needs to be played. Many people won't be spending hundreds to buy packs, and hundreds of dollars that is, to buy packs and get the cards right away. So they're stuck with basic cards and what few expert sets they can scrounge up through the basic pack that they get. So hopefully you see the problem now. The fact is, legendaries are not broken by any means, especially for a real competitive level. Sure, there might be some numbers that need tweaking, like Ragnaros's attack or the damage from his passive or things like that. But for the most part, they're pretty balanced if you have good decks. Simply put, a great deck will beat a good deck. A good deck will beat a bad deck. A bad deck with legendaries will beat a bad deck without the legendaries, and a bad deck with legendaries normally loses to a good deck and almost always loses to a great deck. Let's throw one more curveball into the mix. Arena. In Arena, you're building a random set of cards with as much synergy as you're lucky enough to get. Often this leads to decent decks with some cards that don't really fit in. I'd say at best it's a good deck, and at worst, it's pretty much random crap. Then let's toss in some legendaries. Granted, legendaries are pretty rare in Arena. Sometimes you'll get one, rarely you'll get two, and I haven't yet seen 3 anywhere. So let's go back to our model. A good deck is generally going to beat a bad deck in Arena. But throw in a legendary or two, and a bad deck can definitely cause an upset on that good deck. In Arena, legendaries can be like gold. And hey, that's what color they are. Their gem is, anyway. I'm living proof of that. My recent Druid run relied heavily on Ragnaros pulling out clutch victories, and let me pull out 8 wins, which is a huge achievement for a terrible player like myself. Bringing all of that back together, let's take a look at rarity in general. A basic 2-drop like Bloodfen Raptor costs 2 mana for a 3/2 minion. A common 2-drop like Fairy Dragon, so it's got the little white gem in it, has the same stats, but a special ability that it can't be targeted by spells or hero powers. A rare 2-drop like Knife Juggler has the same stats, but provides more damage through its ability. An epic 2-drop, such as Doomsayer, has 7 health and destroys all minions at the start of your next turn. A legendary 2-drop like Lorewalk or Cho copies spells into the opposing player's hands. What really am I getting at with this? The simple fact is that in most cases, the rarer the card, the better its value as an individual card. This means that legendaries should feel legendary, and they should be awesome. But when you have a mix of cards that don't play well together, a legendary is an obvious replacement for almost any card in there. The most common times when you have cards that aren't really put together well are A, when you don't have a large card pool, aka beginners or early free players in Constructed, and B, when you're playing Arena. These are really when legendaries shine. Now let's put aside Arena for now, for 2 reasons. First, legendaries still aren't that prevalent in Arena. You can mostly expect 1 legendary in every draft, 2 if you're really lucky, and 0 if you're unlucky. Second, there's already an understanding that if you go into Arena, you're subject to a bit of luck anyway. So the number one thing to focus on is for the newer players. We've already established that legendaries really aren't broken at high levels of play. At low levels, however, legendaries can be frustrating, keyboard smashing, rage-quitting cards of doom. Some may be saying, who cares? They're all noobs anyway. Well, that argument may be valid, but I can tell you that it is not a good mindset for a game that is still in beta. This kind of feeling is toxic and results in people crying pay to win. Then those people who decide to spend money go buy cards and get their legendaries and start stomping the other noobs, but then suddenly they reach the higher end decks and find that their legendaries aren't all that useful by themselves. This frustrates them as well. The problem isn't that legendaries make the game pay to win. The problem is that legendaries make Hearthstone pay to win early on. Let's compare it to another popular free-to-play game, League of Legends. In LoL, League of Legends, LoL, you can spend money to buy champs and skins for the champs. Well, in Hearthstone, you can spend money to buy cards. And of course, you can spend dust to buy specific cards. But there's no way to spend gold or real money to buy specific cards, especially early on. You'll spend your gold, and you could get lucky, but if you don't, you're going to get a lot of commons that aren't duplicates. Therefore, you cannot disenchant them into dust. It takes a lot of gold and a lot of packs to get to the point where you're actually disenchanting more cards than not. And there's really no other way to get dust besides Arena for specific cards. In League of Legends, you can spend real money to buy a specific champ that you really want to play. In Hearthstone, you cannot spend real money to buy a specific card that you want. Okay, let's be a little bit realistic here. I'm not trying to say, Blizzard, you should let people spend lots of money to get specific cards. That's a terrible idea, and I absolutely don't endorse it. I like the crafting system and think it's a great idea. The problem is that you don't get to use it pretty much at all until you open a metric ton of card packs. What this results in is a lot of hodgepodge decks at the lower levels that really can't compete with high-end decks, and even struggle against the same hodgepodge decks with a few legendaries thrown in. The comparison continues down the same lines. In LoL, no matter what champ I pick, at most levels of play, I can pretty much beat any other champ I'm up against if I play well. Yes, there are counterpicks and other nuances, but in most games outside of ranked mode, which is only unlocked once you reach the max level, any champ can beat any champ with the right amount of skill. In Hearthstone, if you take two brand new players and they both open a few packs, if the first player opens a legendary or two and the second doesn't, the first player already has a big advantage, especially if they're on the same level of skill. Simply put, a big chunk of players are in this bracket, and the staggered start of the beta, as well as the mediocre matchmaking system at the moment, doesn't really allow for players of equal card pools to meet up in battle. If a great player starts up, they can use the basic set and dominate early matches, but even then, they will eventually run against a few legendaries that the basic cards just don't match up with. This doesn't happen at the beginning of the beta, after the wipe, mind you, because everyone was on the same level. But now that we've had time to build up collections, newer players are coming in and just getting wrecked. If I was a terrible player and couldn't rank up, I could still be getting gold from my random wins and quests and build up my deck, or just by packs. Eventually, I would have a better deck than my peers and move up just simply by that. This is quite literally pay to win, with legendaries being a key point in that. The difference is that you can't pay to win all the way to the top. You can only beat out the newer players and the free players early on by paying to win, because eventually you won't be able to match the decks that are very well built unless you get actually better at the game. Okay, sorry for getting a little bit off topic there, so let's bring it home. The topic is, are legendaries too legendary? And my answer is that at low levels, absolutely. But at competitive levels of play, absolutely not. Going along with that crazy rant I had, this week's question to the viewers is, do you think that Hearthstone is pay to win, and why? Please leave your comments in the comment section below, and I'll pick a few to read for the next episode. I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Weekly Coin. If you'd like to send in a suggestion for future topics, or have questions you'd like me to answer on the show, please send an email to the.weekly.coin@gmail.com. Please like, favorite, subscribe, all that jazz if you like the series, and, as always, you keep it salty, Internet.